Hello, white people. A new report says Hispanic identity is fading. Is that really good for America? This is an article from February 2nd, 2018. Last semester, a student of mine named Fernando came to speak with me after the last meeting of my class on Latino identity. He thanked me for getting him to think about not only his roots, but his connections with other Latinos and our contributions to history and culture. He was an engineering student of Colombian ancestry, and he'd done a presentation about a 1992 song by Mexican alternative rock group Café Tacuba called Tropico de Cancer. The song was about a Mexican engineer who questioned the threat to the environment by unbridled development and rejected the notion of the superiority of modern civilization and the so-called savageness of indigenous culture. Students like Fernando represent a pattern among some young Latinos who were raised as American and during the crucial formative years find an urge to connect with and understand their ancestral culture that is often sacrificed in the pursuit of mainstream acceptance. These young people defy the notion of gradual assimilation that is often the conclusion of carefully researched studies because the way Latinos relate with their cultural and racial identity is never set in stone. How we see ourselves can take a marked turn that can be inspired by personal experience and political and historical circumstances. A study released last month by the Pew Research Center suggested that lower immigration levels and high interracial marriage rates among Hispanics cause their identification as Hispanic to fade over generations. The study says that although recent immigrants identify as Hispanic at a rate of almost 90%, this number drops to around 50% after the fourth generation. Currently, 11% of adults with Hispanic ancestry do not identify as such, the report stated, and 23% of Hispanics most often refer to themselves as American. And if you guys know me, that really burns my britches. These people are not American. The implication of these findings, say the researchers, is that despite projections that Latinos will be 24% of the U.S. population by 2065, these trends in self-identification may affect the way we view the influence and impact of Hispanic identity in the future, as well as the notion of a future majority-minority United States. Identification as Hispanic or Latino fades with each generation. Look at that. See all these liars being embedded into our culture and destroying it? Whether we choose to identify ourselves as Hispanic, Latino, or increasingly popular Latinx, these labels help us find our place in American society and culture. While there will always be Hispanics who no longer need or want to identify the forces in society that create included and excluded groups on the basis of what one's race or ethnicity appears to be, are not going away. From the early 20th century activism of W.E.B. Du Bois and Marcus Garvey through the civil rights movement, African Americans have consolidated a powerful notion of identity based on racial solidarity. This approach pushed back against anti-black racism and yielded tangible political results, as well as power and influence in American society. Such leverage will remain elusive to Hispanics if we move away from acknowledging and embracing our difference. Hispanic identity is fluid to begin with because so many of us have mixed-race ancestries. That's why it's important to put this issue in proper historical and social context. And no disrespect to the Pew Research Center, whose work on Hispanics I find extremely valuable, our multiracial backgrounds make it more likely for Latinos to lose our identification than African Americans. The strict black-white binary of racial identity in the United States differs from the more nuanced racially mixed narrative of Latin America, whose societies offered a form of racial status mobility through intermarriage with Europeans. In the past, some have chosen to strive for whiteness through marriage. In Spanish, it's an adage called mejorar la raza, or better the race, but many Hispanics reject white identity. On the census forms, most Latinos prefer not to identify as either black or white, and 97% of those who check the some other race category are Hispanic. The report cites the slow growth in immigration as a factor in decreasing Hispanic identification, but the reason for that decrease could be influenced by current political and economic trends. The slowdown in the U.S. economy since 2008 has substantially lowered rates of immigration, but the anti-immigrant attitudes that have been stoked in America in recent years and have climaxed with ascendant white nativism and the election of Donald Trump are also to blame. Such a climate, which can cause concern over something as small as microaggressions in the workplace to more serious concerns like a rise in hate crime, are a strong motivation for avoiding identification as Hispanic. Decreased contact with Spanish-speaking relatives and cultural celebrations also are cited in the report as significant reasons that Hispanics are losing their identity. Culture is often transmitted, as the study says, through pride for Hispanic cultural traditions, which can include influences from Spanish, Indigenous, Amerindian, and African origins practiced by parents and relatives. Such pride can be traced back to political movements of the 1960s that were a reaction to difficulties Hispanics faced during the 1950s, when Operation Wetback led to thousands of deportations, and the stereotyping of young Puerto Ricans as juvenile delinquents criminalized a generation. The lessening of this talk about pride in later generations can be due to increased assimilation and the success of affirmative action programs, but the recent surge in anti-Latino sentiment can potentially spark the return of pride messaging. And then there's the issue of language. The report explores the connection between fluency in Spanish and Hispanic identity, but there is a growing trend in which young Hispanics are insisting they are Latinx even if they don't speak Spanish. This is the response of a generation of U.S.-born Hispanics who sometimes find their identities challenged by natives of their home countries who don't think they're Hispanic enough and come off as too American. All of these factors suggest that while the Pew Research Center's findings have validity, Hispanic identity is always changing between identifications with the larger label Hispanic and that of specific countries, between being bilingual or English or Spanish dominant, the gray area that Latinos inhabit in this country's historical black-white binary inevitability leads to shifts in identification that are the rule rather than the exception. What's most important is that labels like Hispanic or Latino will always be here as long as mainstream America remains intolerant to difference. The importance of the ethno-racial designation is the way it can be used by the Census Bureau to determine the need for social programs that address wealth inequality, access to education, and residential segregation, to name a few of our nation's societal imbalances. Viewed through such a lens, it becomes clear that to identify as Hispanic or Latino is not just a whim, a personal preference, or a demographic or cultural trend, but often an act of survival. These people have been in our country for a couple of generations, and they say that they are from here, and they say that they are Americans. And you and I both know that they are not Americans. And being an American is not an idea or a piece of paper where you were born. No, it's a heritage. You know something? I can't be Chinese if I go to China. If I have children born in China, they're not going to be Chinese. They're going to be American because American is my ethnicity and my heritage. Just because somebody from a foreign country moves in next door to you, invites you over for food, gives you something to drink, laughs with you, helps you with a couple of projects, these people are neither your kith nor your kin. These people are not your neighbors, and they are not your brothers. A lot of Americans have been brainwashed into believing that anybody can be an American, and anybody who smiles in your face has integrity and is a pretty good guy. People with integrity will project their integrity onto others until they find out the hard way that that was a big mistake. These foreigners will always side with their people, their heritage, their brothers, and their neighbors. Foreigners may smile in your face, But when they go to the voting booth, they're going to vote along the lines of their tribe and their values. Have you noticed how many anti-constitutional laws are on the books right now? The number of Americans who vote against the Constitution are a tiny minority. Foreigners are taking advantage of affirmative action, and they're crying racism, xenophobia, bigotry. Maybe the folks who live right next door to you and smile in your face are not saying this directly to you, but they are saying this. They know that they don't fit in. They know that they cannot compete with us. They know that they cannot get ahead in our society because they are not us. Foreigners living in the United States are very jealous and very angry that them and their countrymen have not been able to create a level of success that we have in our country, because you know that civilized people will create a civilized nation. If anybody has any real life experiences of them projecting integrity onto a foreigner and that foreigner turned around and stabbed him in the back, called him Nazi, xenophobe, bigot, racist, whatever, please email me your experience so that I can make it into a video. All right, white people, that's the damage for now. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to your comments below.